Hi everyone, another day of our read aloud and math problem of the day. If it looks like I got a little bit of sun on my face and I look a little tanner, it's because I went on a 10-mile run. So I cannot feel my legs anymore. Wasn't exactly the best decision, I don't think, but I needed to go on my long run, and so here we are. Today we're going to be reading a story called Henry's Freedom Box. And this is a true story about a person named Henry Box Brown, who was one of the people who was freed from slavery using the Underground Railroad. And I chose to read this story because your vocabulary video about predictions is assigned for today, and you're also watching Brain Pop video about Harriet Tubman, who was one of the conductors on the Underground Railroad. So when we talk about the Underground Railroad, you hear about Harriet Tubman a lot, but you don't necessarily hear about a lot of the other people that were really important for that event. So what I'm going to do is, as I'm reading, I'm going to make some predictions based on things that I already know about Henry Box Brown and things I already know about his story, and just the clues that the author kind of gives me in the text. So as I'm reading, if you have your own prediction, I want you to keep it inside your head and see if your prediction is correct for the later on in the story. So this is Henry's Freedom Box by Ellen Levine and illustrated by Kadir Nelson. Henry Brown wasn't sure how old he was. Henry was a slave, and slaves weren't allowed to know their birthdays. Henry and his brothers and sisters worked in the big house where the master lived. Henry's master had been good to Henry and his family. But Henry's mother knew things could change. Do you see those leaves blowing in the wind? They are torn from the trees like slave children are torn from their families. So I'm going to make a prediction now that that little metaphor that the mom is making about leaves being torn away from the trees and comparing it to how children are torn away from families, I think something will happen with Henry Box Brown where he will not be with his family anymore. One morning, the master called for Henry and his mother. They climbed the wide staircase. The master lay in bed with only his head above the quilt. He was very ill. He beckoned them to come closer. Some slaves were freed by their owners. Henry's heart beat fast. Maybe the master would set him free. But the master said, "You are a good worker, Henry. I'm giving you to my son. You must obey him and never tell a lie." Henry nodded, but he didn't say thank you. That would have been a lie. Later that day, Henry watched a bird soar high above the trees. Free bird, happy bird, Henry thought. Henry said goodbye to his family. He looked across the field. The leaves swirled in the wind. So my prediction was correct. He is being taken away from his family because his original master was ill, and now he's being sent to work with his master's son. Henry worked in his new master's factory. He was good at his job. "Do not tear that tobacco leaf," the boss yelled at the new boy. He poked the boy with a stick. If you made a mistake, the boss would beat you. Henry was lonely. One day he met Nancy, who was shopping for her mistress. They walked and talked and agreed to meet again. Henry felt like singing, but slaves didn't dare sing in the streets. Instead, he hummed all the way home. So now I'm predicting that Henry and this lady, Nancy, he kind of likes her, so maybe he'll try to find her later in life, or maybe they'll end up getting married, something like that. Months later, Henry asked Nancy to be his wife, so my prediction was correct. When both their masters agreed, Henry and Nancy were married. Soon there was a little baby, then another and another. Henry knew they were very lucky. They lived together even though they had different masters. But Nancy was worried. Her master had lost a great deal of money. "I'm afraid he will sell our children," she said. Henry sat very still. Henry worked hard all morning. He tried to forget what Nancy had said. His friend James came into the factory. He whispered to Henry, "Your wife and children were just sold at the slave market." "No!" cried Henry. Henry couldn't move, he couldn't think, he couldn't work. "Twist that tobacco!" And the boss poked Henry. Henry twisted tobacco leaves, and his heart twisted in his chest. So now he was being pulled away from a second family. At lunchtime, Henry rushed to the center of town. A large group of slaves was tied together. The owner shouted at them. Henry looked for his family. "Father! Father!" Henry watched his children disappear down the road. But where was Nancy? He saw her the same moment she saw him. When he wiped away his tears, Nancy too was gone. So he's watching his family being taken away, which must be very difficult on him. Henry no longer sang. He couldn't hum. He went to work, and at night he ate supper and went to bed. Henry tried to think of happy times, but all he could see were the carts carrying away everyone he loved. Henry knew he would never see his family again. Many weeks passed. One morning, Henry heard singing. A little bird flew out of a tree into the open sky, and Henry thought about being free. But how? As he lifted a crate, he knew the answer. He asked James and Dr. Smith to help him. Dr. Smith was a white man who thought slavery was wrong. They met early the next day at an empty warehouse. Henry arrived with a box. "I will mail myself to a place where there are no slaves," he said. James stared at the box, then at Henry. "What if you cough and someone hears you?" "I will cover my mouth and just hope," Henry said. Dr. Smith wrote on the box, "To William H. Johnson, Arch Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania." Henry would be delivered to friends in Philadelphia. Then he printed on the crate in big letters, "This side up with care." Henry needed an excuse to stay home, or the work boss would think he had run off. James pointed to Henry's sore finger, but Henry knew it wasn't bad enough. He opened a bottle of oil of vitriol. "No!" cried James. Henry poured it on his hand. It burned his skin to the bone. Now the boss would have to let him stay home. Dr. Smith bandaged Henry's hand. They arranged to meet the next morning at 4 o'clock. The sun was not yet up when Henry climbed into the box. "Ready," he said. James nailed down the lid. Dr. Smith and James drove to the station. The railway clerk tipped the box over and nailed a paper to the bottom. Dr. Smith begged the clerks to be careful, but they didn't listen. They threw the box into the baggage car. So I'm going to make a prediction that this box isn't going to be treated too carefully because people obviously don't know that there's a person in it. So I think Henry might be uncomfortable. He might even get hurt. He might just be treated a little bit too rough, and some bad things might happen to him. Hours passed. Henry was lifted up and thrown again upside down. He heard waves splashing. This must be the steamboat headed for Washington, D.C. The ship rode smoothly, but Henry was still upside down. Blood rushed to his head, his face got hot, his eyes ached. He thought his head would burst. But he was afraid to move. Someone might hear him. "I'm tired of standing," someone said. "Why don't we move that box and sit on it?" said another. Henry held his breath. Could they be talking about his box? Henry was pushed. The box scraped the deck. Now he was on his right side, now on his left, and suddenly, right side up. "What do you think is in here?" said the first man. "Mail, I guess," said the other. "I am mail," thought Henry, "but not the kind that they imagine." Henry was carried off the steamboat and placed in a railroad car, this time head up. He fell asleep to the rattling song of the train wheels. He awoke to loud knocking. "Henry, are you all right in there?" "All right," he answered. The cover was pried open. Henry stretched and stood up. 4 men smiled at him. "Welcome to Philadelphia." At last, Henry had a birthday. March 30th, 1849, his first day of freedom. And from that day on, he also had a middle name. Everyone called him Henry Box Brown. The end. So, like I said, that is a true story about a real slave who escaped slavery utilizing the Underground Railroad in a way. He sent himself as a piece of mail to Philadelphia, and which was a place where slavery was not allowed anymore. So he became free by doing something really creative. So as sad as that story is, it's really inspiring, and it really makes you think about the lengths that people go to save themselves and to be free. So we really need to consider how lucky we are that everyone in this country is free, and we don't have to be worried about being held against our will for anything, or having any of those worries that they had back then. So I love that story. It's really interesting to me. It makes me really passionate about making sure everybody is treated fairly and equally. And I know our classroom is all about that. We always talk about how we want to treat everybody with respect and treat everybody the way that they want to be treated. So I thought it was a great book to share with all of you. I'll be right back with the math problem of the day. Love you, miss you, and hope you're all staying safe. Welcome back. We are going over our math problem of the day, and this one is about some friends who have some marbles. Josh has 174 marbles, Sally has 74 marbles, and Michael has 433 marbles. About how many marbles do they have all together? Now, the two really important words that I hear in that problem are all together, which means everything is going to be put together into a total, so we're going to be adding. And the most important word is about. About always means we're going to be estimating or rounding. Now, in this story, we're going to be rounding to the nearest 10. So here are the 3 numbers. We have Josh with 174, Sally with 74, and Michael with 433. Now when I round to the nearest 10, I'm going to underline the tens place because that is the digit that we are rounding to. If we were rounding to the hundreds, I would underline the hundreds place. But in this case, we're rounding to the nearest 10. Now I need to determine what the bossy number is. And the bossy number is the number that's going to tell us whether we want the smaller number or if we're going to round up to the larger number. The bossy number is always going to be the number to the right. So in this case, it's going to be the 4 in the ones place. Now we need to find our benchmarks. We need to figure out which 2 tens 174 is between. Now, we didn't do anything to that 1. We didn't underline it, we didn't circle it, so we're going to keep that the same on both sides. Both sides are going to start with 100. We underlined the 7, so we're going to slide that down on this side, and the rest of the digits become zeros. So it's between 170, and the next 10 after 170 is 180. Now this is where the bossy number comes in, the 4. We have that rhyme, 4 or less, let it rest to the smaller number, or 5 or more, let it soar to the bigger number. 4 is 4 or less, so we're going to let it rest to the smaller number. So the first one rounds to 170. Now we're going to do the same thing with the other two numbers. Underline the tens place, figure out what's the bossy number, and determine our benchmarks. Now we don't have a hundreds place here, so I don't have to bring anything down. I'm just going to start with the number I underlined. So it's between 70 and the next 10 after 70 is 80. And again, our bossy number is a 4, so we're going to let it rest to 70. Same thing with 433. Underline the tens place, circle the bossy number. We didn't do anything to the 4, so we're going to bring that down on both sides. Whoa. On this side, we're going to slide that 3 over and make everything else a 0. So it's going to be between 430 and 440. 3 is 4 or less, so we let it rest to the smaller number. Now we are not done. We successfully rounded and estimated these three numbers, but the problem asks about how many marbles do they have all together. So we need to add all of these numbers together. Our first number we found was 170, and our second number we found was 70. I know 0 plus 0 is 0. 7 plus 7 is 14. Need to carry my 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. So 240 is great, but we still haven't added all of our numbers yet. We did this one and this one, but not the 430. So we're going to add the last number, the 430, to our total. 0 plus 0 again is 0. 4 plus 3 is 7. And 2 plus 4 is 6. So our answer is 670, but you always, always, always need a label. What are we talking about here? We are talking about marbles. So our answer should be 670 marbles. Oh. 670 marbles. Okay? So I hope your brain didn't forget what that really important word about means. You always have to be rounding and looking out for those really important words to make sure that you don't make those tiny little mistakes in your problems. Okay? Thank you for watching. Love you, miss you. Can't wait to see you all super soon. Watch tomorrow's video for another great read aloud and to go over tomorrow's problem of the day. Hope you're all staying safe, staying happy, and I'll see you later.